Okay, guys, we might get a little bit of background noise, but I think we can get one more video in before people actually start coming into my office this morning. Let's see. The article that we're on now is called Obedience to Authority. And this article, again, we're kind of exploring, what people will do according to their own set of values and what influences us in our actions according to our set of values and other people's values. This What they described to you is this experiment that was conducted, 40, 50 years ago. It's very interesting. I think your material tells you that, this arose in response to something that was going on at the time. At the time, several Nazi war criminals had been caught and they were being put on trial. And when they went on trial, what these criminals said, what these, former military officers said was, listen, it wasn't my fault. Sure, I pushed people into the gas chamber. Sure, I killed plenty of people, but it wasn't really my fault. I was just following orders. I didn't think it was okay. I thought it was horrible. So I'm not a horrible person. I just did these things because I was following orders. Somebody else told me to, and I had to do what I was told. So this fairly well-known psychologist at the time decides to conduct this experiment to see if people would do something that was, very much against their basic nature, their own set of morals, if someone in a position of authority told them to do it. So he sets this experiment up. He puts out a notice. He's at a big university, puts out a notice, that he needs volunteers for this experiment. Now, if I remember correctly, I think they were actually told it was an experiment to look at the results of negative reinforcement on learning. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure about that, but they weren't really told what the experiment was truly about. So these group of volunteers come in, and he explains the experiment to them. This is what's going to happen. In one room, well, we're going to divide you into teachers and students. The students are going to go into a room, and they're going to have little electrodes connected to them. The teachers are going to be put in another room, and they're going to have in front of them a panel that has the controls to the electrodes. And when you looked at the panel, there were all these little levers, and it went, like 5, 10, 15, 20. So clearly, the shock that you were giving increased as you went up. And they said, what you're going to do is the teacher is going to ask a question, and when the student answers it, if the student gets it right, then you're just going to go to the next question. But if the student gets it wrong, you're going to shock them. And each time they get a wrong answer, you're going to go up to the next level. You shock them a little harder, a little harder, a little harder. So who wants to volunteer? So we get volunteers. Well, the day that they come in, they bring them in 2 at a time into this little outer waiting area, and they point at them, you're the teacher, you're the student. Teacher goes into the room, they get their questions. Somebody goes into the room with them, and I've seen the tapes of this. It was like a guy in kind of a white lab coat, and so he looked official. He had a clipboard to write on, and he goes into the room with them. The student is supposedly taken to their room and hooked up. Now, what they didn't know is the student was always an actor. The student didn't actually, it wasn't a volunteer. They knew what was going on. When they went into their room, and you couldn't see from one room to the other, when they went into their room, what they were doing was they were playing a set of pre-recorded responses to the shocks. So every single teacher got exactly the same response because they were all pre-recorded, and they played the same recording for every teacher. So teachers didn't know that, though. They thought, this person was being hooked up to electrodes. So everybody says they're ready. Start asking questions. They ask one, they get it right, we're okay. They ask another one, they get it wrong, they shock them. And they hear a little response from the other side. Okay, so they ask another one, they get it wrong, shock them, they hear a response. Well, as the shock goes up, first the response starts out kind of, oh, gosh, just a little response. And then the response starts to get, oh, that really hurts. As the shock value goes up, the response from the other room, and I've heard the tapes, it's actually kind of frightening to see the tapes because they recorded all of these experiments. As the response goes up, the shock level goes up, the response turns into, you're really hurting me. At one point, the guy says, I think I have a heart condition and I don't have my medicine. You're killing me. I think I'm going to have a heart attack. It starts screaming. It's horrible. He really sounds like he's dying over there. And he tells them that he has a heart condition and he doesn't have his medicine. He really needs them to stop. As the responses start to get more, it's clear that the man is being hurt on the other side of the room. It's very interesting what the men who are the teachers do. And at that time, guys, the original experiment, I have to tell you, was conducted only with men. Men of different ages, men of different occupations, but only men. Men as the student, men as the teacher. a man as, the person conducting the experiment. So as the man, the man's, sorry, the man's response indicates that he's really being hurt, the men will start to kind of turn around and look at the guy conducting the experiment, the guy in the lab coat. He says he's being hurt. And the guy in the lab coat never physically touches them or approaches them. He doesn't hover to make them feel bad. He kind of stays back, either sitting at the table or staying back, and he just says, it's okay. We have someone with him. You signed up for this experiment. This is your job. Just keep going. So they'll turn around and shock him again. Keep going. As it gets worse, they start to question more. And, the man in the lab coat just keeps very kind of calmly and soothingly saying, it's okay. You guys signed up for this experiment. We're watching him. If anything happens, it's our fault. It's not yours. Almost every time, as soon as he says that, it's our fault, not yours. If anything happens, go ahead and do your job. They turn around and shock him. These men, all of them, go up to the point that the man says he's being hurt. A good portion of them, the majority of them, go up to the point until the tester, the experiment person, tells them they can stop. So they just keep inflicting this horrendous pain upon this other person because somebody tells them that's their job. And the person telling them that's their job tells them that it's their responsibility. It's not that the person shocking, it's not his responsibility, it's just his job. So they keep shocking them. When they interview them afterwards, they ask them questions. And let me also tell you this, they did an extensive pre-interview to make sure that none of these men were prone to violence. They didn't like hurting someone. So they kind of factored that out. So afterwards, after the experiment, they talked to them and they asked them, why did you do it? Did you want to hurt him? No. Did you think that that was wrong? Yes. Well, why did you do it? Well, they told me it wouldn't be my fault and it was my job. I had to do it. So basically the same response that these people, these Nazi war criminals, their response to killing millions of people was basically the same response to these everyday guys inflicting horrendous pain, to the point that the guy says you're killing him, somebody that they don't even know, but they just kept shocking them and hurting them. Now I should tell you this isn't in your readings, but after this experiment and another experiment that was basically psychological torture, in retrospect, they changed the rules about how you could do these experiments. And so this experiment couldn't be conducted again until just about 2-3 years ago. A university got permission to conduct the same experiment again, and they found people who didn't know anything about the first experiment, and they conducted it again. Now this time, 40 years, 50 years later, they tested both men and women. They threw a few kind of curves in. Now, I will tell you this, when they were testing men, they had both the student and the teacher be a man. When they were testing women, they had both the student and the teacher be a woman, so that there was no kind of, like maybe men would be nicer to women or women would be, I guess, possibly less kind to men. I don't know. But they, kept it the same gender to kind of skew out those factors. They also threw a few differences in. They did part of the experiment where they sent people in as pairs, the teachers in as pairs. One of the teachers was an actor, though. They knew what was going on, and they just gave them a little, they would kind of look at the second teacher and go ahead, and see if that would encourage them, like a group setting, a little peer pressure. Would that encourage them to keep shocking? They came out with close to the same results as far as how many people were willing to inflict pain beyond what they thought was acceptable. Slightly more women would go further than the men, which I thought was very interesting. In general, we think of women more as the nurturing, empathetic gender. Apparently not so much. Well, I don't know how you want to interpret that. Maybe we're not so empathetic, or maybe, some of the women in the experiment said things like, hey, I've had a baby, I can take that pain, they can take some pain. So maybe it goes back more not to the lack of empathy, but to the fact that, our experiences skew how we interpret things. Maybe women still, even though there are very different roles in society than there were 30, 40 years ago when the first experiment was conducted, maybe women still feel more subjugated to authority. They feel that they have to say yes more than men do. I don't know. That's what I want you to think about as you're reading this. What do you think made these people go on? how do you interpret the fact that conducted 40 years later, basically they come out with the same result? You would think society would have changed. You would think actually we seem these days to have less respect for authority. So you would think that they would be more willing to say, no, I'm not going to do it. But then again, balance that with we're on a daily basis subjected to more violence in our games, on our TV, and our music. So maybe that makes us sort of desensitized to violence more, so that makes us more prone to inflict violence. I don't know. Those are some of the kinds of things I want you guys to consider when you're reading this and to blog about.